stem cell research, et cetera, et cetera. Do you still, on balance, feel that George Bush was the right vote in 2004 over John Kerry, who, after all, would have continued the war in Iraq once it was there? And yet, the main differences are the ones that I've described in terms of this administration and its priorities seem to me to be pretty significant.
Once again, in reverse, if I may, I'm very glad John Kerry and John Edwards did not become President and Vice President of the United States. I just can't hear myself say I wish that they had, except for one possible reason, which is that John Kerry always said, ask me about my plan for victory in Iraq. And no one ever did, but he said he had one, and I would love to have seen, very much love to have seen what it was. Before we leave Iraq, which probably you're right, we should, I think that there's one thing that exemplifies the whole difference between us. You think that it was avoidable, that it was, in other words, a war of choice, as the saying goes. My view, which I hope I've made clear to those who are watching and hearing this, is that another confrontation, another round with Saddam Hussein was inescapable. There was no way around it. And that was the view taken by the Clinton-Gore administration and by Tony Blair well before 2000 and 2001, which was there was no way of avoiding another confrontation with Saddam Hussein. But it might be nice if just for once we decided what the timing of it and the place of it would be, and not him, as had always been the case before. We waited on his pleasure, see where he would strike next, what he would do next. Okay? That I think summarizes our disagreement.
A footnote on that point, Christopher.
Yes.
Before we leave that point, I just remembered that I believe you wrote in The Nation something. I don't have the recollection perfect, but you said something about how this girl with the beret on, meaning Monica Lewinsky, was the reason that Clinton attacked Iraq in the first place, that he bombed Iraq. So there was a president taking action against this very force.
No.
And you were among those who most loudly accused him of doing it to get Congress's mind off the impeachment, which, by the way, you supported. And just to add to this, Jamie Rubin once told me that it was his view that Clinton would have led the international coalition to war against Iraq, but couldn't because he was constantly being accused by people like Christopher Hitchens, I don't think he said Christopher Hitchens, but certainly you were proudly among them, of making this a diversion from his impeachment problem. So, on the one hand you say that you were confident about going to war under this incompetent, dishonest, religious extremist George Bush, but you weren't comfortable going to war under Bill Clinton, who, for whatever his moral failings, was certainly a much more competent leader than George Bush ever was.
The irony there is, I'm afraid, going to turn out to be at your expense, Eric. I did write about the wag the dog element of Clinton's rocketing of Khartoum, the capital city of Sudan. And I wrote about it not for the Nation but for Vanity Fair, and anyone can look up the piece, which I think makes a very plausible case that he did do that and hit the wrong factory as well for a bounce in the polls. I might add, though, that Richard Clarke and many of Clinton's national security people maintained then that if it was the wrong factory, it still could have been the right one, because in Sudan, Osama bin Laden owned factories that were manufacturing the ingredients of chemical weaponry for, guess who? Saddam Hussein. That was the direct accusation made by the Clinton administration, that you can find an operational industrial connection between bin Laden's terrorism and Saddam Hussein's dictatorship. By the way, on that point, I don't say it's not true, but the way that they hit Sudan without asking for an inspection, without demanding that the Sudanese let them look inside the factory, without any warning and so on, I think was a war crime. And the timing of it, given Clinton's fantastic irresponsibility on all other matters, struck me then, as it does now, as extremely suspicious.
Okay, fine. Now let's return to the question of 2004.
Yes.
Even after everything we knew about George Bush's incompetence, corruption, lack of respect for the Constitution, lack of respect for the press, religious extremism, et cetera, wouldn't address the issues of global warming or stem cell research, because refusal to accept normative science. Did you support? Did you? I don't recall exactly. Did you support Bush over Kerry? And if so, how do you feel about that today?
I've told you already. I've put it as bluntly as I can. I'm very glad that Kerry and Edwards did not become president and vice president of the United States. Now,
well, I wouldn't have picked Kerry and Edwards either, but I certainly would have picked them over Bush and Cheney.
Well, there wasn't an alternative to vote for at that point. Now, as you may or may not know, there's absolutely no reason why you should, but some of our audience might be interested. I was, and I think I remain, a named plaintiff in the suit brought by the American Civil Liberties Union against the administration on the matter of illegal wiretapping. We won a round of that in a district court in Chicago. And eventually we were denied the status to pursue it all the way to the Supreme Court. We made some important points in that, and I'm proud of the stuff I wrote in support of the suit. And I've had myself subjected to, as far as anyone can voluntarily do this, to the procedure known as waterboarding, and written an article about it, illustrated with photographs and indeed with clips that you can see on the web if you want, for Vanity Fair, saying that there's no question that this is a torture procedure. It's not an enhanced interrogation or any of this other nonsense. I have to say, though, that I'm not a registered member of any party. I've written a column today saying people should vote for Obama in Slate, but you sound to me as if you must be a Democrat of some kind. And the reason I say the reason I say that, I know it's a rough thing to say, but I'll justify it. After the Oklahoma City bombing, and when Clinton passed the Effective Death Penalty and Anti-Terrorism Act, if you remember, the American Civil Liberties Union said that the Clinton administration had been the worst for civil liberties on record. The most violations of civil liberty, the most speed-ups of arbitrary death penalties, the most denials of due process and the presumption of innocence, in the panic measures that were taken, forced through both houses, after Oklahoma City. Now, do you want to know do you want to guess how the Liberals might have behaved if they'd been in power after 9/11? Can you think of anything they wouldn't have done to show how tough they were? I bet you can't. Anyway, I think you have to accept that my question to you has some force, and I wouldn't mind an answer to it.
For the record, I was extremely critical of the Clinton administration, even though many of my good friends worked in it, up until the point where the impeachment process began. And then I decided that, then I saw that the forces inside the Republican Party were far more dangerous to the country than anything Clinton could do. And I became at that point, it's fair to call me a supporter of the Clinton administration because I was judging the Clinton administration by its enemies. But
always
for
a
6
mistake.
years, for 6 years, I was critical of the Clinton administration.
Usually a mistake.
As a liberal. As a liberal. Now, and again, I guess I am a registered Democrat because I live in New York, and in New York, you got to vote in the primaries because we don't really have general elections here all that often. The Republicans are pretty much of a non-party. But I don't.
I'm registered in Washington in the same way for the same reason.
Okay, but I think it's undeniable. I think my larger point here, Christopher, is I actually think of myself as the Liberal Party rather than the Democratic Party. And if you look at American liberalism, since, I don't know exactly since when, but since the end of the middle to the end of the Reagan administration, what you get is a party that has been tempered by its failures in the 60s and 70s and has become, I think, admirably pragmatic and conservative. And if you look at the liberal position on all of these major issues, from Afghanistan to Iraq, going back as far as Central America, and on every single one of the issues I mentioned, be it torture, civil liberties, Katrina, the environment, the Liberal Party is a sensible, pragmatic, conservative party, whereas the party that you've joined is a revolutionary party that things have gone quite badly for. I mean, it's possible that the world was going to react the way you and William Crystal and Paul Wolfowitz predicted it would to an Iraq invasion. It's possible that saying that Sunnis and Shias wouldn't get along is just pop psychology. It's possible that Iraq might have recognized